As some of you might have noticed, the way I talk about myself isn't always very nice. Like, for instance, I call my book my trash pamphlet. So as those of you who have read my trash pamphlet know, my trash pamphlet. If I'm at a party and someone asks me what my trash pamphlet is about, I'm going to tell them. It's about 200 pages long. And I call myself lonely pervert, some frizzy pervert on the internet. I know many people will not trust a chick like me when there are peer-reviewed publications to be had. I need a hobby, other than drinking. But there is one topic about which I am willing to compliment myself, and that is spanking parties. I am good at throwing private spanking parties. And if you want to be good at it too, stay tuned. Because in this video, I'm going to give you my tips for throwing a great weekend spanking party with your friends. Before we jump into the list, I want to be clear about what kind of party I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the kind of big national party with a few hundred people like the one I described in this video. I'm also not talking about one-night parties where a handful of Spanko friends come over for a few hours and then go home. In this video, I'm specifically talking about what we call cabin weekends, parties that last for 2 or 3 nights with, say, 10 to 20 friends in a rented house. I love all kinds of spanking parties, but cabin weekends are my personal favorite. As always, I'm going to talk specifically about cabin weekends for spanking fetishists because that's what I am and what I know about. But I do think some of my tips could be useful for other fetishists too. So without further ado, here are my top tips for throwing a great cabin weekend. 1. Pay attention to the ratio. When you're putting together your invite list, it's tempting to want to invite every single Spanko you know. I sympathize. I'm really extroverted, so every time I throw a party, I want the whole world to come. But that's just not realistic. First, rental houses like Airbnbs have a finite number of beds and other sleep spaces. We'll get to that in a minute. But before you even start looking for a house, you'll want to make a guest list. And if your party is 90% tops, it's not going to be very fun. You don't need to be insane about getting exactly the same number of tops and bottoms, but, do pay attention to the ratio. 2. Sleep spaces are super critical. Spanking parties are wonderful, but they can also be physically and even emotionally taxing. You've got endorphins ricocheting off the walls, people sometimes drop, the food usually isn't that healthy, and no one is getting enough sleep. My point is, the little sleep that people do get at spanking parties is kind of important. So if you're hosting a party, my strong suggestion is to get a little bit obsessive about the sleep spaces. You can't just find a house on Airbnb that says it sleeps 16 people and say, "Great, I've got 16 guests. This house sleeps 16 people. That will be perfect." No. What you need to do is sit down and write out a list of every single bed, sofa, and air mattress in the house, and then figure out exactly who will sleep where. Then, when you have a rough plan, you need to touch base with your guests as soon as possible. If 2 people who don't know each other that well will need to share a king-size bed, for example, you need to check in and make sure that's okay. If a few people will be sleeping on sofas, they need to know that in advance. And if there are more couples than there are private bedrooms, you need to touch base with those people to make sure they'll survive for a few nights in a shared sleep space. It's really important that people know what to expect. Problems arise when guests arrive at a party to discover a different kind of sleep setup than they were expecting. So get obsessive about the beds. I personally have spent hours, seriously, hours upon hours, making spreadsheets of all the bed options in various rental houses. It's a pain in the ass, not in the good way, but it's worth it every time. This is my most important tip. Keep your sleep spaces tight, okay? 3. Use BCC, not CC. As I mentioned in a previous video, every single Spanko in the world is extremely famous. They have high-profile jobs. They're so famous. If their profile were a building, it would be the Burj Al Arab, because it is so high. So when you send out your invites, send the message to yourself and BCC everyone else. You don't want to risk having someone freak out because other party invitees can see his email address. Because he's so famous. I tease because I care. It is true that respect for privacy really matters, but it is also true that a lot of us could really benefit from calming down a little, just a little. In the meantime, do keep those email addresses private. Use BCC, okay? 4, be uncompromising about money. Hosting a cabin weekend can be a really scary financial investment. Renting a big house with space for 10 to 20 people to sleep in for 2 nights can cost hundreds or even thousands of dollars. And a lot of people are flaky. They say they want to come, but then they crash out at the last minute. So to protect yourself, I strongly recommend asking for money up front. I personally have no interest in making money from my parties, but I also have no interest in taking a loss. So when I invite friends, I send out a link showing exactly how much the Airbnb will cost and tell them how much it will cost per person divided equally between all of us. And then I tell people they need to send their money before I book the house. If some people equivocate, which they will, that's fine. Let them equivocate. But if they don't send their money by a certain time, there just won't be space left for them in the house. 5, touch base with first-timers before and during the party. When I have first-timers at one of my parties, I try to touch base with them from time to time to make sure they're feeling comfortable, included, and happy. No one is ever entitled to play at a party, but if someone does have a specific fantasy they'd like to realize, I'd like to know about it if they're comfortable telling me. I might be able to help bring it to life. 6, be prepared for some initial awkwardness. The first few hours of a spanking party usually don't have that much spanking, especially if you're hosting a group of people who don't know each other that well. People feel nervous. As a host, I think it's one of my responsibilities to get the ball rolling. One of the ways I sometimes do that is by suggesting a game of Spanko Spin the Bottle. I suspect you can figure out how that game works. It did the trick for awkward teenagers who wanted to kiss but didn't know how, and it usually does the trick for awkward adults who want to play but don't know how. But Spanko Spin the Bottle isn't your only option. Pretty much any game can be perverted for our purposes. When bottoms lose, they get spanked. No shock there. But when tops lose, they get personal service, which means they have to do a favor for the winners. I usually ask for a drawing of a cat, but the last time I won personal service, I made my victim speak in a Welsh accent for the next 20 minutes. I am hilarious. Obviously, never pressure anyone to play a game who doesn't want to. Group role plays can also be a good way to break the ice. Not everyone likes them, but I really do. I think they're a fun way to include people who might feel a bit shy. At some point during the party, I usually announce that I'm in the mood for a group scene and ask if anyone else wants to play with me. If people don't want to participate, they won't. But it gives anyone who might feel a bit left out a chance to jump in. And those are my tips! I hope you'll consider hosting your own cabin weekends. Some of the best and most meaningful friendships of my life started at cabin weekends. I know some of you are going to email me to say, I'd love to host a cabin weekend, but how do I find other Spanko friends to invite? My answer is this. You're gonna have to de-lurk. You have to reach out to other Spankos in your area on FetLife or on other websites, or you have to go to one of the public national parties to meet new friends. You've got to make friends with other Spankos. That's the first step. And if you think there aren't enough other people in your area, don't be so sure. For my next spanking party near London, people are traveling from 6 different countries on 3 different continents to be there. And that's not even all that unusual. There are a lot of people out there who will go to extreme lengths to be around like-minded friends for a weekend. So why don't you give it a try, huh? It's better than spending another weekend lurking alone on SpankingTube, isn't it?